And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
There's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and Happy New Year, everyone. This is our first show of 2017. Tonight's guest is Harry Drew, and we're going to be talking about the supposed Kingman crash in Arizona, Kingman, Arizona. And before that, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the UFO news. I want to thank everyone that supports the show. If you'd like to help us out for $2 or more a month, you get to listen to the full 2 hours on any media player, of course, on our website. And if you can't do that and can't help us out and you still want to listen to the full 2-hour show, you can come to podcastufo.com every Wednesday evening from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or you can go over to the Dark Matter Digital Network on Thursdays from 10 to midnight. And again, that's Eastern Standard Time. Alejandro, how is it going?
From Kingman, Arizona, all the way to Tacoma, Philadelphia, Atlanta, L.A. I know people are going to be thinking of that during your show here.
Okay. Wow, that was pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't you think that's what I always think of when people bring up the Kingman UFO? But I am doing well. I have survived the new year, and I lived to see 2017 and what it may have in store. So that's for better or worse, that's what's going down.
Oh, and before we get into the news, I do want to tell everyone that you, myself, and the great Lee Spiegel did a year in review 2016, and that is on Open Minds. And I'll actually have, I think I'm going to be able to put an embeddable player on my sidebar of the show as well. So great show. Hope our listeners check it out. It's a year in review with Alejandro Rojas, myself, and Lee Spiegel, and that's on Open Mind.
A lot of fun. And these are always really fun because we get to review stories that we think were significant that most likely the listeners have forgotten about. Some of them they haven't because we were so excited we spoke about them throughout the year. But some of these, like you even forgot, or the St. Athan one. So people will have to listen to hear about that one. But, yeah, what I think is my favorite sighting of the year, video sighting. But there was an interesting one we posted today or yesterday.
All right.
Want to hear about it?
Yeah, let's hear about it.
Let's get into the news. UFO news. Did it. That's my little, news intro thing. But, this was in Florida. This was a video taken by a guy who is a helicopter pilot. This was December 18th at about 5:24 p.m., and where he is, it is still light out. So the pictures from the video, it looked like it was light. The sky was light, but it was probably starting to get dark just because it's getting darker everywhere. It was in Orlando, Florida, but, it's still pretty bright out. And, of course, daylight sightings are always exciting. This guy says he felt it was a glowing craft at about 1,500 feet in altitude, that it flew across in a straight line and then eventually flew upward and vanished. He took a video with his cell phone, and you can, at the beginning of this video, see this glowing object moving across the sky, and then it moves into some clouds or towards some clouds, and you kind of lose sight of it. It's pretty interesting. He says he's a certified helicopter pilot, and he knows it was not a plane, helicopter, rocket, meteor, birds, balloons, blimps, etc. And the MUFON investigator who took a look at it, James Thomas Horn, agreed with him. This is one of the MUFON cases that's posted by Roger Marsh. And the video is pretty interesting. You know, I saw it at first, and I thought, that's a plane. But then I looked at it, and I thought, no, it doesn't look like a plane. The shape doesn't seem to be right. Then I thought it was a bird. And but I couldn't confirm that either. And then I thought, well, maybe it's a satellite. But because sometimes they can be seen during the day. So it's a really hard call. Now, there was a rocket launch on the day that this took place from Florida, but at a different time. And I don't think it looks like a rocket. It doesn't have a trail. It's not moving like a rocket would move. So I don't think that is it. So I'm kind of at a loss at this one. I mean, hopefully some others will take a look at it, but it's pretty weird, and the witness is very credible. Yeah, it's an interesting sighting.
Yeah, I wonder what Mark D'Antonio would say about this video. He always has an answer, it seems.
Yeah, that son of a... Well, you saw the video, right? What did you think?
Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting. It didn't look like anything that really is explainable. It was sort of a round shape, or it looked like a round shape. And, it... Now, I don't know if it was the trick of the video or what, but it seemed to jag a little bit as it moved along.
It did. Almost like it was tumbling or something. I agree with you. And that's kind of why I thought it was a bird, because sometimes the flapping of the wings can cause that sort of effect. And I guess that's still a possibility in my mind.
Right. Well, yeah, it would have to be kind of low, because that was moving really fast. If it was a bird.
That's true. Yeah, but sometimes they can appear to be. In a white object, it often can be difficult to know if it's in front of the clouds or even behind the clouds.
Yeah.
Because the clouds themselves are white. So, yeah, it's mysterious.
Right. Well, what else is happening?
The other thing, and we talked about this a little bit, but there's some more detail here, and is that Colonel Halt, I've been in discussion with him, as I think I mentioned on your show, about this new Rendlesham Forest witness. And it's been in the news, especially the UK tabloids. But we posted a full interview that Philip Mantle did with this guy who says he was there in 1980 in late December when UFOs were seen over a period of a couple days. And however, his telling doesn't necessarily fit with the facts that, at least that I'm familiar with through the many books that have been written. Colonel Halt, who is a deputy base commander, wrote a memo about it. You've had on the show Halt even recently, and then I think you even talked about this case.
Yeah.
And you Peniston and Burroughs, some of the other witnesses. So I'm sure Halt reviewed some of this with you on your show. I know he did. But yeah, there are a couple issues. So, for instance, Longero says he went to the forest and he saw Warren and he saw Peniston and he saw Halt there. But there was no one time where a bunch of people went to the forest and all of those people were there together. Mm-hmm. So that's the issue with that, because even the first night, he says Larry Warren, another guy, was out there. But Larry Warren, even by his own admission, wasn't there the first night. Neither was Halt. But it was Peniston, Kabasing, I always get his name wrong, but the third guy, and Burroughs were the three witnesses, the only three people allowed in the forest the first night. So it doesn't fit with the first night. The second night, the night that Halt did go out there and took a bunch of men out there, he said he took men from Woodbridge, which was a base nearby, but still miles away from Bentwaters, where Longero was stationed. Mm-hmm. So Halt says he wasn't part of that group. So he's like doubtful that Longero was out there at all. Longero says Halt is doubting I was there, but I was there. I swear on the life of my children. And it could be because they did see, objects over the entire area. So it could be that Longaro did see objects, just not out in the forest and not with the other guys, and he's just remembering it wrong. And I kind of like to give him the benefit of the doubt that that's probably the case. But unfortunately, as Holt points out in a story we posted recently, the facts don't fit. And I do agree with Holt that the facts are pretty important. You really, especially when you're trying to gain credibility, you need to be clear what the facts are. And then someone like Longaro has to say, well, here's what everybody else says. Either here's my explanation of where I was, when, or like I often have to do with my girlfriend, is admit that I'm wrong and that I remembered things incorrectly and she remembered them correctly. And I apologize. I'm just human, for goodness sakes. Honey, I'm just human.
You can make that public. Say it right here.
Yeah, I've made it public.
Yeah,
that I am officially human.
You wonder if there are other witnesses that will eventually come out and talk about this. I know it's we're getting into 30 some odd years here, but you just wonder if some people are just keeping that situation to themselves. And one of the things Halt said is he puts this thing on a shelf and really, doesn't make it part of his life. And, perhaps there's other people that feel that very same way and they don't have any initiative to actually talk about it.
Well, one of the witnesses I mentioned is like that. So it's funny, Halt even says that in the story, how he didn't want to come out and talk about this, but he's so compelled to make sure the facts are straight that he's got to come out and say, hey, you got it wrong. This is what really happened. So that's what compels him. But Cabansag, the gentleman we mentioned earlier, he was one of three people that went out the first night. The other two have spoken quite a bit. We've had them at our UFO Congress. We're going to have Colonel Halt for the second time, actually, at our Congress this year. But Cabansag is someone who feels like, I told people what I experienced, but I really don't want anything to do with this, and I don't want to talk about it. So he's an example of someone who just does not want to come forward, even though he could clear up some issues. But, also, and you can kind of see his point, clearing up some issues means calling some people out and getting in the middle of this fight and these battles, and he doesn't want to be a part of that. He doesn't want that kind of complication in his life. So you're probably right. I'm sure there are others, and in a way you can't blame them, Right. Why get in the middle of all of it? And
perhaps they're not even paying attention to what other people are saying. It's that far removed, from their life. It's very possible. And,
poor Longaro, I do feel for the guy, because if he did come out and share and he's just remembering things wrong, I'm sure he feels a bit persecuted. But maybe he doesn't have a girlfriend who calls him out all the time when he gets stuff wrong, so he's not used to it like I am.
Yeah. Right. Well, we have time for another one if you have one. If not, we'll just we'll call it a night for news.
Not really. I mean, with the holidays and everything, I don't know that I have anything else. There were some interesting stories in the headlines this week. So when you go to openminds.tv, you see UFO headlines and the stories are listed there. So at least for yesterday, I haven't posted for Wednesday yet, but for Tuesday, there were a few interesting sightings. So there's an Australian one, a UK one, and these are sightings that made it into their mainstream media. I'm sure they were covered inaccurately by the UK tabloids, but these are ones that were written about by credible news outlets.
So we already have some 2017 sightings.
Yeah,
basically.
Exactly. In fact, one of the stories from the Herald Express, a UK paper, says, first UFO of 2017 spotted by world UFO expert over Newton Abbott.
Oh, I saw
and
that.
This is Yeah. So, yep, they're even making that claim, the first of the year.
Right. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much, and we'll be talking to you next week.
All right. Talk to you soon, buddy.
All right. Okay, everyone, hang in there for this quick music break, and we'll be right back with Harry Drew. Harry Drew, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Yes, I'm very pleased to be on.
How
are you?
Doing well, thank you. Doing well. And I've had a few people over the last, I would say, year or two suggest you on as a guest. This supposed, I'm calling it supposed crash because there's been, over the years, I've seen, some controversy here and there about it. But I understand that you've done a lot of really interesting research about the whole story. Before we get into any of that, let's hear a little bit about you and also what sparked your interest in this particular topic.
Well, I'm interested in the topic because I live in the Kingman area. And when I moved here years ago, I was aware of a lot of stories about the Kingman UFO and claims that it was real, claims it was a hoax. And my background is I am an author of over 40 years. I'm a historian, and that means that I actually do research, field research, archival research, oral interview, historic interviews with people, and do a lot of digging and detective work with agencies, be they local or federal government, or wherever it takes me. I am also the former director of museums of history, anthropology, and archaeology. I'm a museum professional, which is certainly to my benefit. I'm also a cultural resource specialist in ancient civilizations, and I have lectured in colleges and universities on ancient Egypt and the history there, as well as European history in regard to the coming of the Second World War and what led to it and all those kind of things. I am a published author. An overview of some of the things I've written you can find on my author's page at Amazon. What we'll be talking about here, when I finally decide to release this, will be published and available through Barnes & Noble and Amazon and a number of other things. And I'm still working out which way the documentary is going to go, because I did 6 years of field work here in the desert. I have interviewed, by virtue of being here and being associated with century families, which means people that have lived in this area at least 100 years. The families, individuals come and go as geriatrics takes its course, but the descendants and also first class, what I call first person eyewitnesses, including the last surviving member of the United States Air Force retrieval team that took 2 of the vehicles out of here, of the 3 that I've unearthed, literally, and one being the first one we all refer to as the Kingman UFO, and there are about 15 erroneous stories going around, everything from ray gun fights with the aliens where it crashed, a dead alien woman ran off, and they fought the retrieval team from the Air Force till the power packs went dead, or someone was in a tower in 1953 at the military Army Air Corps base there and saw a bogey on the PIP radar screen and looked out in the night sky and saw the flash as the Kingman UFO slammed into the ground. And those are claims that are out there in book form, on blogs, and DVDs. People speak on it. I've listened to some of these people myself. I can tell you how the weather was, what day, what the synopsis was in the paper, what the forecast was for the entire month of May 1953, because that's what I'm talking about here. There were UFOs here before that. There were UFOs after that. I'm addressing the Kingman UFO incident. And I have included, I opened my book up and went back and put in some stuff that goes back to 1947, because I've had people saying, this sounds very similar in a lot of ways, like the Roswell story. Well, information about the Kingman UFO first came out April, May 1953, 7 years before the Roswell books were ever written. And some of the principal people, there's a paper trail on the whole thing. Some of the principal people were following along with the research, a 65-page interview with a scientist, a physicist, a mathematician, an engineer, who were here to examine the craft that went down and did not crash. It made a forced landing, and along with the drawings, I have all of that. And I am the replacement historian, per se, of the historian that preceded me from Mojave County, Arizona. And I am the principal leading expert here, if that's relevant to anybody, here in Kingman, about what happened in Kingman. I have interviewed living people from the time who weren't friends of a friend who knew somebody that was an eyewitness or claimed. I've talked to people who could hand me things, give me things, give me the most important thing of all, a landmark. I've driven all over here with a Jeep, a little Wrangler. I've walked through temperatures of 105. I've had an engineer working with James Cameron preparing for the Mariana Trench Drive stop what he's doing and come up and fly drones with 6 of my cameras on the drone so I could look at the ground, because I can't read the ground terrain here from my experience in the field as doing archaeological work and this kind of stuff. I can read where camps were, human habitation happened 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago. But we have undergrowth here now because the climate change, which is a natural process with the planet Earth, we are having vegetation growing here the last 15 to 20 years. So you don't see the desert, literally all just flat sand. And so I needed to get up 10 feet and 30 feet up off the ground. A drone can do that. I instantaneously found the second crash site, and I had wonderful clues. A reverend ordained minister who was interviewed by a curator friend of mine who spent 20 years out here trying to find what we call the Red Lake crash site, which is about 20 miles north of Old Town Kingman, that happened right a few days after the forced landing happened. And he told the curator that one of the things that he did back then was that he counseled Area 51 workers in being as ordained as a minister. And it was a church. It separated the ability of the government to interfere with who was saying what about what. And so it put him onto the site, and he was out there for over a 20-year period and couldn't find anything. The drone instantly confirmed what I thought I'd seen. And I'm talking about, this is not something armchair, you surf the internet or you read somebody else's book. This is out there where 11 of Arizona's 15 poisonous creatures exist, okay? And in great numbers there. And so And it's tedious, long, hard work. This is not just an archival going through stuff that somebody else wrote, and if it's wrong, you believe it and write it down. This is to straighten things out. So, but my background is that. I'm currently, I'm making some modifications to this by literally adding some things to the book, because I've come across in my research from 1856 coming forward to right to the end of the Kingman UFO story, that there were some other things nobody knows about, or had mixed up, or deliberately left some things out so the story sounds better. And in other words, as Steve Bell says from one of my presentations, Steve Bell is an internationally known prolific science fiction writer, 42 novels to his credit, and he lives in Rome, Italy. And he did a presentation for me at the World UFO Congress session at Tarquinia, Italy, 56 miles out of Rome. And basically he said, what is different about what I'm doing is I'm a professional, and I don't ever let a good story to tell get in the way of what the facts really are. And it's the other way around. A lot of people, they just skip over the facts so they can tell a good story. It's entertaining. But what I found, the third UFO, second crash, really, I didn't expect any of these things. None. I didn't expect to really find anything. And the third one turns out like this was getting off into the, Twilight Zone, because it was too freaky, and because two of a crew of four that survived the crash into the Wallapai Mountain here, 8,256 feet high, right in front of everyone in Old Town Kingman, Mayberry, USA, 1953. It set the mountain on fire, and two of the crew were arrested and taken to the county detention center, an interrogation room, a solid concrete vault, 14-inch thick, steel-reinforced ceilings. That's the ceiling of the 1915 Mojave County Courthouse, which is a historic structure that still stands. And the sheriff's office was in the basement below grade. No windows, no openings, nothing. You had to go through the main door and downstairs to get to it, and then through two locked doors to get in. These people, as a newspaper reporter said, these two strange-looking men were taken in by a Forest Service worker at the scene of where the fire was, because they were wandering around aimlessly, and when addressed about why they were there, they never spoke. So they were taken into custody to be interrogated, because they were thought to be arsons, because there were no rainstorms, no lightning storms, only pleasant weather in Kingman, Arizona, the entire month of May, in spite of claims that the UFO was knocked down by a bolt of lightning, was carrying an ambassador going to Los Alamos, and the craft was flying southeast. That's the wrong way to go to New Mexico from Kingman, Arizona. And we know, I'm not alone. We know why this thing went down and why they're wrong. They're terrestrial craft. They weren't interstellar vehicles, and if you flew a modern day 737, unhardened electronics and all of that, and you flew one in over the same place, it'd probably just roll over and go right into the ground. Okay, because the early technology the Air Force was using here, even though there was no military presence other than 3 radar systems set up in a triangular ground location, and they were boosting power to try to get a much greater distance than what was available at the time in 1953, because they were worried about the Russians. It was the Cold War, and there was a rumor the Russians were building a bomber they had named the Bear that could come down over the North Pole carrying nuclear devices and drop them on the United States, and we wouldn't know they're coming. And our radar on the ground had a limitation of 25 miles. That's what the military had from World War II. And out on the water, the naval radar would work 45 miles. And they were trying to get 150. So they were using short pulse microwave radar generators, bolt one to another. You bolt 2 together, you double the power. You bolt another one to it, and geometric progression, and it goes up. That's how they would work it to get it out to 150 miles. But it also caused a lot of other problems, and including killing birds in flight and other things. But the Air Force wasn't interested in side effect; they were interested in results, range, and so that's what caused the problem. There's a real quick overview about what it is I was looking for. I not only did the landmark help me, I used the information from the 1973 interview also to help with some ground information. And when I found the landmark offside 1912 Wagon Road, I drove straight to the other place. I already knew where to go, and I pulled up, and out the driver's side window of my Jeep, I was looking at the fuel kitchen. Everything the Air Force left behind is there, including relics that were one time requested and paid for by the military. An experimental object was made in 1951 and 52, and there's hundreds of them there, okay? And so I did a complete survey of the area, the places they came in and cleared to leave room for a GM Model 3301 Army bus, 840 made. They brought 40 scientists out on 21 May 1953. It arrived early evening. The driver's name was Dennis. The principal person I'm interested in with that was the first-hand eyewitness who was brought there to try to estimate or determine the forward flight speed and rate of fall before it hit the ground, because they couldn't understand why it was all there. It didn't even have a scratch. But it landed, and it landed in a slow, a very wide, very slow drain field off the Wallapai where the mountain meets the desert floor. And in May, I've been right there during all the times that this happened, different seasons, different years. I go back because you have to play in this to get an average of the conditions, okay, based today versus then, to see how they compare. And basically they're identical. And but 4 inches below hardpack, the ground's water soaked. And this thing weighed 5 tons, and it just settled. And they were trying to figure out, it hit the ground so hard it was sunk 20 inches. Well, it was in the ground 20 inches. What they didn't understand is that the ground was completely full of water, and the thing just settled. And the same kind of thing I videoed and photographed. I put a Jeep tire up in the same on the Jeep, just drove up and put a wheel near the area. You get the same result. A couple of hours, it's down, and you have less load on a Jeep wheel than 5 tons, but it was sinking. So that made some sense. I did porosity tests, did radiation tests at the site. The place that the Air Force cleared for the bus to turn around, because this is like on rayon tires. It's a very primitive machine compared to what we have today. They also had equipment they had to bring in. I know where it came from. I know what they brought. It's like the storytellers talk about all the roads that were here. There was even something on one of the main UFO people. They've got a TV thing and out of Phoenix, and they talk about the UFO was picked up and put on a trailer. That's pretty much accurate. It's a little more about that. And then they closed off Highway 40 from Kingman all the way to Barstow, California, which is about 245 miles west of Kingman. And so they could take the Kingman UFO down Highway 40 over to the Nevada side and get it on Highway 95 north to take it up to Groom Lake. The problems with that, okay, Highway 40 didn't exist in 1953. It was there 31 years later. Okay, so there's some just basic things, basic research that a lot of people get involved in telling stories about, probably a lot of things, but in regard to Kingman, that they don't bother to look up and find out how many roads there really were here in 1953. I have a 6th grader boy and a 6th grader girl standing on video with the maps of today and the maps of 1950 to 53 with the highways and ask him, what are the main differences you see here? And they were being filmed and in the room at different times, so they didn't see each other. And each one noticed that there were roads now, that there were no roads then. And you really need to have a highway there to be able to tell a story that you took something down it or somebody did that. And then if that's not a problem enough, there was no bridge across the Colorado there. And then so they switched their story and said they took it over Davis Dam, which wasn't done. And then on the 19th day, that's the day after, the 19th day of May, 1953, the day after the craft made a forced landing, there's an article in a local newspaper, front page, about how they needed to get a bridge. There wasn't one. And I have a lot of museums that have worked with me. I've been given security clearances to go into places that I need to get to. The head of security for the county court did something that was amazing for me. I found a document that gave a full description of the sheriff's office in 1953, and I couldn't find the sheriff's office, the old one. And I contacted the current Mojave County Sheriff's Office. They're remarkable people. But they said, we're sorry, because it was torn down about 1966. And I thought, well, after 60 years, that makes sense. And then I had a call from a museum and said, we made a mistake. The sheriff's office moved, and they were put in the basement of the 1915 courthouse. And so I had this document, described it, but it didn't say where it was at. So I went to the head of security for Mojave County the court. And the court still holds business in this building, but the lower portion is for court business only now, and it's been restricted to the public for 30 plus years. So nobody gets to go in there. And there's security all the time. And so I asked if I could speak with the head of security, and I told him, I said, if I describe to you what the interior of the 1953 Mojave County Sheriff's Office looked like, would you just tell me yes or no? I didn't tell him I was interested in about something with possible crew members from a spacecraft or alien ship or something. And he said he would do that, and I described things in detail. And we were sitting at his desk, and he stood up and he said, follow me. He took me over there and took me in, everything right down to the oak bench, the Forest Service the worker sat on, waiting for one deputy to go get the sheriff. This is Mayberry. It's like 3,400 people on a busy day and only 6 blocks, and that was called Bunch Town because everything's bunched up. And anything beyond that was called String Town, was strung out. So you have a little farm or somebody with a garden or whatever back then. And so, interestingly enough, here was the bench, an oak bench that the Forest Service worker sat on right outside the detention room door that was locked, which is a concrete vault. And the 2 crew members that were taken down off the mountain where the craft went down and crashed, they had no idea. The Air Force recovered 2 corpses on the top side of the fire. Some of the wreckage had to evacuate because the fire was climbing the mountain and they were in danger of being injured or killed. So they got out of there. The 2 crew members were either rattled from hitting the side of the mountain or disoriented or whatever. And that's what made them stand out, beyond the fact that they were wearing some kind of strange coveralls, flight suits. Okay? And so the sheriff, 1 deputy went out, 3 deputies were in the office behind 2 locked doors with the Forest Service worker, and they waited for the sheriff to come back because they wanted the sheriff to interrogate these 2 strange-looking men personally. And when they brought him back, he was briefed by the Forest Service worker, and he told them to open up the door, and the sheriff walked in, the Forest Service worker and the deputy, and the 2 strange-looking men. This is the end of the story, so to speak. Okay? But the 2 strange-looking men weren't there anymore. And there's no way out. This is below grade, meaning it's below the surface of the ground outside. No windows, no openings. And then I was allowed to photograph all of this, and I put some of that in the book. I have an oversized, hardbound, I'm sitting there right in front of me, full color archival paper. The whole thing is archival. And they're intended for libraries, state library systems, universities, and museums. And I haven't really thought about doing anything with these as far as those going out to the public, whereas a trade journal, 6x9 paperback, yes, and that'll have lots of nuts and bolts stuff. But this has on-site photos, including what I just told you about. And these things, by the way, there was a police report. You don't take people in, to interrogate them without mentioning anything. So notations were made to the effect. And but that's the back end. The front end is the craft. There is a north by northwest, by south, by southeast flight path for UFO across the Red Lake Desert and the Hualapai Valley, which is in the immediate Kingman town area, a little bit to the north and south, and very close to the east. And the radar systems were set up, one on the east side of Red Lake, and one set up to the southeast, maybe 12 miles away from what is now called, and has been called for years, Radar Hill, which sits right smack above Old Town Kingman. And in 1955, they took out all the temporary test equipment, and they brought in what would be like an early forerunner of backscatter, and they brought in 200 Air Force personnel, and they set it up on Radar Hill. And all of the outbuildings that they made are there at this moment. This is no secret. It's front page stuff, and but it evolved because of budgeting from Congress. A lot of things happened in 1951. The Army Air Corps base was handed off to Edwards Air Force Base in 1951, who promptly began development of the base using what we today call black funds, black money, black budget money. They didn't have to wait around to get budgeted in 1955. They were already working. Groom Lake today is referred to as Area 51. Okay, and the Kingman UFO landed, made a forced landing. Rate of fall was 8 feet per second, was the estimate based on improper information. And the scientist who did that questioned his own findings. It made no sense. The rate of fall, if you take a pencil and hold it out in front of you and you just drop it, it's 32 feet per second. If you get high enough, like in a balloon, and you're wearing the right kind of clothing, you can jump out, and before you have to open your parachute, you can exceed the speed of sound because you continue to accelerate. And that was recently done, where we have someone who literally jumped out of a balloon at extreme high altitude and survived cracking the sound barrier. But just to drop a pencil, the minute you let go, it goes right to 32 feet per second. The craft came down. Early estimates were 8 feet. The rate of fall was 8 feet per second. That means there's a controlled descent. At the very best, it meant a controlled descent. And the fact that it had no damage. And I have drawings of this thing that are very interesting. There's been a few people that have seen these back in the 40s and 50s who didn't have the opportunity to be underneath it and touch it and walk around it and all that kind of thing, who were pretty much right in some of the guessing, but they weren't making claims about invasions or anything else. This was a disc-shaped craft, approximately 30 feet in diameter, and it had, according to the witnesses who were there were four first-hand touched it eyewitnesses that I have. Okay, I have witnesses here, 15 witnesses who observed this thing going down in what was a 7.2-mile trip to the ground. And it flew through the radar field that when the 3 radars were turned on, it came through like it probably come through 100 times or 500 times before. It's a terrestrial shuttlecraft, and all of a sudden they had some type of problem with the avionics or the propulsion, and it would cause the same kind of a problem in a modern-day commercial non-hardened jet. That's why cell phones are still not allowed. And people say, oh, well, cell phones can't do that. In my book, I show where it's maybe 2014, a woman being arrested and removed for refusing to turn her phone off before they take off, because it can cause the autopilot to shut off, or it can cause flaperons or ailerons to misbehave or interfere. And if it releases the autopilot, it doesn't trip the alarm. It's like the pilot reached over and flicked it off. And so the crew doesn't know. And it's like, well, everybody would know if the plane wasn't on autopilot, isn't it? That's not really true. But with all that aside, this thing flew through there where they'd been many times before, and all of a sudden the entire way things work changed for them, and they weren't able to continue their flight. They weren't hit by a bolt of lightning. They were not shot down by rockets. The story just go on, or fighter jets intercept them. There was no military in Kingman, Arizona, with the exception of a radar operator and a technician on each one of the 3 radar units that were portable, brought in to where they were experimenting with trying to boost the short pulse microwave radar units to gain more distance. And that was all that was going on. And regular radar was under development back, I think, in Massachusetts. It was back east somewhere in that area. And with all of that going on, they flew through. There was no Army Air Corps here, and the Air Force technician and the Air Force radar operator had no idea. They somewhat shot down a UFO, and the Air Force at Nellis, who knew something went down and were here within 2 hours, had no idea they caused it. And later there would be a communication within the Pentagon from one Air Force officer's office to another, and I noticed that Dr. Greer has published that in something. And it's just speculation, and they're saying, do you suppose it has something to do with our radar? And here, yeah. If it did in Roswell, I have no idea. I have no idea, because I'm not trying to do Roswell. I have a complete story that's different than that. But I know that a lot of things that are mentioned about Roswell, everybody got to see that in 1973 because it was mentioned about Kingman. So how much you pick up from one to the other, I don't know. Does that help you and the listeners at all to get an idea?
Yeah, there's there's a couple of questions popped up here and there as we were going along, but the one question I was going to ask you toward the beginning but you may have already covered it, was what, before you started looking into this, what was the general story? This happened, I think it was May, what was the date? May 18th, supposedly, but you kind of went all through that. But the witness that first came forward about this story, was that, did his story have any weight to it, or whether?
Yes. In fact, let's get right to that and get past that. A man by the name of Arthur Stansel, who is real, okay? I can tell you which community councils he was on in Sudbury, Massachusetts. And I mean, I've dealt with authorities back east, and before he died, he donated over 2,000 hours of his time at a hospital at Ispic, New Hampshire. And I talked to the director of volunteer services about him. I mean, it's just like, I'm a historian. You know, I'm not looking at somebody's book to find out what happened, because I know better than that. And this is what drives historians up the wall. Somebody exaggerates 400 years ago, and somebody else goes to write another history book, and they use that exaggeration, and they might even add some of their own. And by the time it reaches the students in our college or our high schools, they're reading stuff, this complete junk, because it's been manipulated for whatever reasons at the time for hundreds of years.
I'm sure about that. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, well, so do I. You know, and as a historian, I have my reputation is impeccable in regard to matters of history, and you know, you get it as right as you can. And if you have a problem or doubts, you can share them. It's also fair that I can speculate, but I have to make sure everybody understands. I'm speculating. This what might be, but I'd rather have the reader question this. And if they want to know more, go out and dig up the information, if it can be. And in not all cases it can be. I will tell you that when I first took a look at this, they were talking about it happened on the 19th of May, the 20th of May, and the 21st of May. And I'll tell you where some of this comes from. Arthur Stancil worked, he was at Wright-Patterson for 12 years when he was sent to Frenchman Flats at the nuclear test site in Nevada. And he was a materials handler. Basically, we would think of him more as like the bomb blast effect analyst. They put up things like a little town or some cars or a bus and different things, and then they detonate an atomic bomb to see what happens, you know, at point blank, inside the fireball, outside the fireball, miles away, to get an idea of how, if we're going to resist getting hit by one of these things, or we want to see how to overcome an enemy's hardening of their targets, areas that we know how to impact it. So he was doing that, and he got a call from the director of the operation there, the atomic bomb blast operation. Arthur Stancil was really there. He was interviewed by a really well-learned, highly credible historian and researcher, Raymond Fowler.
Oh yeah,
who is still living back east. He's
he
a
lives
wonderful
about
man.
30 miles from me.
Yeah. Okay, he's a wonderful man. Okay, and he did some things we could never get away with now. He talked to like the bosses, the employers of Arthur Stancil. You know, they can't tell you anything. They wouldn't even take your call. They might even send out some people to check you out. You know, now, but and so he documented, and it starts with an interview with a 15-year-old boy by the Sudbury, Massachusetts newspaper, who heard that he was writing a book about UFOs for youth, for other kids to read. He's 15 years old. His name is Jeff Young. And one of the books, like I think it's Majestic 12, they say, he and another kid named Campbell were the first men in ufology history to interview Arthur Stancil. Oh, they weren't men. There was one kid, and he spent about 6 months. It's right in the front page of the paper, and it's like multiple pages in the paper. The newspaper from Sudbury, I told him, there's so many versions of this, and it's been misused and changed so many times in stories used by all the ufology people who become self-professed experts on this. Then I got a hold of the newspaper back east, and they sent me the original microfilm. And talk about trusting a historian. They sent me the original microfilm. And so I could read it for myself, and I copied it, shipped it back, and they got it back safe and sound. That's what we do. And in it, it tells the real story. And there was a little blip, and it mentions Arthur Stancil by name, and talking about that he had looked at a spaceship in Kingman, Arizona, and a clipping service that Raymond Fowler had clipped that out, and they sent it to him. Raymond Fowler got a hold of Arthur Stancil, hunted him down, and Arthur Stancil agreed to do an interview. Okay? And so Stancil went and found a notebook he had, and there's some innocent things in there that some other person has said if he was really who he said he was, he would have never said it. This is a personal little notebook, and he left it in his barracks before he was flown down from Indian Springs on the 21st day of May, 1953, because his boss called him after work the day before on the 20th and said to report after work at Indian Springs Air Force Base, which is near Nellis. It's north of Las Vegas. And he boarded with 14 other technicians. They flew them to Phoenix, Arizona, where there were 25 scientists waiting, and this GM model 3301 bus waiting with the windows taped over with missile tape so they can't see out the sides. And in that particular bus, there's no back window, and there's a jump seat in the back for luggage, or they can carry 4 more people. The bus is a 36-person bus. They took 40, and they were all given sack lunches. I know the whole routine for this thing, and I even know where the bus went and the name of the driver that drove it from one military post to another post 5 days a week. I mean, this stuff really exists if somebody looks and really spends the time. And so it's like, for historians, we can't pass the rock sitting out on the desert floor. We have to kick it over because there could be a clue. And it's never ending. And so we have to bring it to a stop somewhere. And that's why I'll eventually have to release the book, because I haven't been doing it for the money. Or I would have done it. I'd have let it out a long time ago. You know, this has got to be right.
Okay.
But anyway, so Raymond Fowler did the interview, and it's 100% correct. And what Arthur Stancil was saying about a lot of things, I verified.
I see. Now, did I read somewhere that he had a different name? Did he change his name or used a different name or something like that?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, that's true. Now keep in mind, his real name associated with the Kingman UFO was in the paper on April 23rd, 1973, in the Sudbury, Maine newspaper. Arthur Stancil. I got it in the book. It's right there. His name for everybody in the world to know. But they decided, I don't know why exactly, the real reason, beyond the said reason, they ended up giving him a pseudonym of another name so that people wouldn't somehow identify Arthur Stancil. But I really think, from what I've read from Arthur Stancil and the information I've had from interviewing the director of volunteer services and some other places that dealt with him, is that he got a little spooked about the idea that maybe too much is being said about him, and it could end up causing problems as far as connection with UFOs and aliens and all this stuff. And so Fritz Werner was the name that was referred to, but it was Arthur Stancil. And by the way, he even was accused of spelling his name wrong by one of the people that you mentioned to me in a call we had before this. And his last name is spelled S-T. For everybody that's paying attention and wonder, what is this guy doing? It's important how your last name is spelled if you're going to be part of history, if you want to be remembered, good or bad. And his last name was spelled Stancil, S-T-A-N-S-E-L. So a lot of stories are still online. They spell his name S-T-A-N-C-I-L, but they don't use the S. And then one of the people who had been doing that finally accused Arthur Stancil of being some kind of a rascal and had changed his name to confuse people or that he was spelling his name wrong. And that's really how he spells it. That was the name on his birth certificate. That's the name on his wedding license. That's the name on his taxes for property that he had in 2 different states. And I mean, so it's him. And that's the name that was in the paper. April 23, 1953, front page. And it disagrees with
1953, April? Or 73?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, 73. I'm sorry.
Right.
70. No, you're right.
Yeah.
April 23rd, 1973, which disagrees with everybody else what they're saying about that and what happened in 1953, which is where I was headed with the 53 part.
Yeah.
So it's very hard on the radio to be able to knock this all out. This is why I did the 22-inch wide open, hardbound, full color archival one for libraries, for research libraries. You're going to be able to see stuff the photos I've taken from the air, from the drone. You're going to see pictures I've taken on the ground, pictures I've taken of where the craft sat, okay? And the area that's cleared, that's still not a thing grows where they removed the craft, okay?
That's interesting. Now, are you naming names as far as the witness goes?
Pardon?
As far as the witnesses go that you spoke with, the first-hand witnesses, are they using their real name? I mean, are you anonymous, or are they using their names?
Some are, well, I have 42. Some are anonymous. At this point, there's one that's semi-conscious because it is going through end-of-life thing. But I've had witnesses passing away because of age. And the philosophy here, everybody needs to understand this too. The philosophy then, and Kingman, during the time that the Army large B-17 bomber and crew training facility at Kingman, Arizona during World War II, there was a operational tower there that fell into disuse. It was closed in June 1945, and all of the equipment, including all the PIP radar scopes, everything was removed from the tower and destroyed in June 1945. In August, after the bombing of the Japanese with nuclear weapons, in August of 1945, the Army Air Corps deserted the base forever. They used it as a sort of a cemetery for aircraft with the intent for a year of trying to sell the craft to commercial industry, and nobody was interested. They ended up putting in a smolder, and they molded down even brand new World War II planes, and the whole thing then was handed off to Mojave County, who became the sole owner and is the sole owner of the former Army Air Corps base, and they began using the airport, the air base runways for the airport, and it is also the site for one of the most ominous, most sinister UFO incidences in all of UFO recorded history as far as we call modern day, meaning since Kenneth Arnold supposedly saw 9 UFOs by Mount Rainier, which is another story, and we won't go there. And it's not right. But the fact is, something far, and this is like parallels Roswell or before Roswell, okay? And you tell me of something that can compare with UFOs, multiple UFOs, launching an attack against a civilian 2-passenger propeller-driven airplane on an approach to land at an airport, 600 feet off the ground. Is that sinister enough for you? Is that aggressive enough for you? Is that equal to any other thing that happens in the UFO world? They were coming from an underground base, 32 miles from Kingman. And it was not only witnessed, there was air to ground, ground to air conversation from the Radio Shack because the tower was no longer in use. Remember, it was deserted. Yeah.
This is a whole nother event you're talking about?
Yeah. Before Roswell. Yeah. So I'm saying it's like news didn't travel very far back then, because if you didn't have a rotary phone, you had a phone that was in a wooden box, and you turned the handle and you got a dry cell in it, and you're running it on wires and insulators or cups or dishes or whatever nailed to a tree to talk to people. And people in Roswell, New Mexico, didn't have any idea what was going on in Kingman. People in Prescott, 135 miles on the road, less than 100 by air, to Prescott from Kingman, had no idea what's going on here, and vice versa, because there was no television. In 1947, there was no radio stations, So it's like this is a totally different world. The highway going out of Kingman, there are only two. Route 66, longest stretch still in existence, is here, okay? And the other was Highway 93 from basically Las Vegas or Groom Lake down to Las Vegas, down to Kingman. They paved in 1951. You wouldn't believe what that paved road looks like. There's pieces of it left, and it's like a snake. And it got to Kingman. There was no more paved road. The road that went south out of Kingman was sand and dirt. They graded, and it went all the way to what is called Wickiup. And from Wickiup to Wickenburg and Phoenix was a wagon road in 1950. Okay? So things are way different. And as a historian, one of the things you do is you got to stop and you got to move back mentally to the period so you can understand what's going on. There's nothing wrong with the intellect. It's that technology had not, where we are now, had not arrived in 1950, 53. It's like color TV, you're kidding. Maybe in a lab someplace, but not for real, let alone black and white, as far as here. And so those types of things are issues that have to be considered, but it's a dirt road. And the northern boundary I've gone out the old road, which is the northern boundary of 1953 Kingman, and it's next to the big highway, Interstate 1, the Highway 40 that I told you about, that one of the leading UFO groups says, and I'm not talking about MUFON, says that the UFO was taken out 40 all the way to Nevada and then up Highway 95. So they closed 245 miles of highway to move a UFO 19 miles. So it doesn't make a lot of sense because it isn't true. And the people didn't get that in research. They made it up. So, but the spooky parts about this is finding evidence, real evidence that something really did happen. And 11, rancher Leonard Neal, who came up from the Big Sandy River down by Wickiup, came up and settled into the Kingman Hualapai Valley and the Red Lake area in the late 1800s. And almost everybody of the old-timers are related to him. Almost everybody, including the current archaeologists for the Bureau of Land Management. Okay? And the motto is that the old loose lip sink ships, they don't tell anybody anything. Okay? And they learned that very well during World War II, where even though there was undeclared martial law, there was martial law here. And they went through blackout periods. And if a UFO landed in their front yard and they were told, you don't talk about it, they don't say anything. And they took that along with a high degree of patriotism, and they moved forward in time to like the 60s and the 70s, and they don't tell. I've had calls from old-timers saying there's somebody, a noted UFO paranormal author. This guy was here and he was asking questions around trying to find some witnesses. And I get a call. there's this guy here trying to find out. It's like they don't like it. They're not going to say anything. We had a city attorney for the city of Kingman for 10 years try to get somebody to tell them something. They never did. And it's like, these are all part of the things. And so that's why my connection with Century families, I sit in on luncheons with them where it's a closed room and they talk about what they want to talk about. And that includes this. And there are some things that I don't convey. I won't. Not there. It'll go as a matter of history. All my work will be duplicated, and it's going to go to two different museums, two different states. That's where it goes. And then the published aspects of it and the documentary or how we end up on that part will end up where the public gets it correct, as long as I'm involved, gets the correct story, and then at some point in time they can look at reference material in the museums or something, or look at one of the larger limited edition full color things that go to museums and libraries and universities, so that they can go to the reference library and look at it. That'll help them a lot. And the visuals say, the 1,000 words in a picture, then there's millions of words there.
Yeah. Now, there was some witnesses that, now, did you speak to witnesses firsthand that said they saw these
I interviewed
humanoids?
them. How's that on?
Humanoid?
I interviewed them on camera.
I see. The ones that actually said they saw the humanoids?
Yes.
Okay.
I haven't mentioned that yet. You did. I haven't mentioned humanoids at all.
Yeah, the strange-looking people you said that were in the jail cell. Two strange-looking men. Yes.
Yeah.
So I was.
There were four living crew members standing outside the craft when 2 hours after the 2 hours had transpired for the Air Force to dispatch a retrieval team to the Kingman airport and meet up with people brought in from another location who had military police. Okay, and they went out to the site. You can't go the same way now that they went then, because roads have changed, okay? And this road is cut off now, one place, but not that it makes a lot of difference. And I can certainly show anybody who wants to see that. But the area where the landing occurred and has the Air Force relics is an archaeological site now. And nobody's going to be able to mess with it. Souvenir hunters are out of luck. Same with the Red Lake crash. Okay? Not only do you have to cross properties that you'd be trespassing on, you'd also be interfering with an area that's owned by the federal government, as well as being on some other private land after you cross several properties that won't let you there now. And so the whole thing's kind of closed up. What I did is I interviewed as many people, including the last living deputy from then, okay? And my last conversation with him was he could barely talk, and the person who was looking out for him was taking him to a cardiologist for heart tests. And that was the end of that. So, the last surviving member of the U.S. Air Force retrieval team was a young airman. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, also a test pilot and stuff, years and years later, along with another lieutenant colonel I uncovered as a result of that, and then interviewed his son, who used to listen to both these colonels talking about it and laughing about some of the stories that were being told. But what they found, this is 1953. What's going on? There were UFO movies, some pretty corny things, and then there was the 1953. There was The Day the Earth Stood Still, and Martians, and so there was an expectation for these guys. They were going to see individuals with antennas out of their head and big eyes and teeth and claws and all this stuff. And so when they pulled up with this Army truck, there were 4 crew members standing outside of the craft because it won't fly. And I'm pretty sure I know why now they were the way they were at the time, because the Air Force never had a clue, because something else happened in and around that period with other crafts, other crew that nobody was really aware of, and it became intense a few days later on the 21st. But so they were the top secret. There's a lot of people talking about, well, they should have interviewed them and did this and did that. This is a retrieval team. Their job is to pick them up, get them out of there, recover the bodies, recover the craft, whatever it is that went down. It's not ours. And get it out of there, and don't do it in a public way. And this is in the middle of nowhere, where they had to send a vehicle out with a walkie-talkie to try to talk over the radio with the people they're in touch with to relay on to get things they need. And right now, there's no cell signal there. It's the same problem. It's a dead zone out where this is. And it's not someplace people should roam. Anyway, it's dangerous. There's a lot of javelina and mountain lion that come down through there. And the javelina attack, they're like a wild boar. And their temperament is, they see you, they're just probably going to attack you. And so it's not a tourist area, but the crew were loaded up immediately. 4-member crew, they were uninjured. They got into a vehicle, and they were promptly taken to Groom Lake. It's as simple as that. When they were handed off, the retrieval team was sent back. They're not told anything, because what happens next there is none of their business. This is what happened when the craft was taken out of there late in the evening, well, in the early hours, actually, of the 22nd. And it was looked at for the last time by a physicist that was brought in from quite a distance. The Air Force went to his home, and this is another eyewitness, and told him to grab a coat, because where they're going, it's going to be cold. That's really accurate. And he was taken, and then by that time, they already had it on a 38-foot trailer being pulled by a M25 tank transporter, which was rated 40 ton. And the 30-foot craft was on a 38-foot trailer, sitting at a bit of an incline, tilt, and they were going to take it over Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam, so everybody knows which one. We call it Boulder at the moment, next to Boulder City. It could not cross the dam because it's too wide. And the Army Corps of Engineers set up and had a barge, and they brought stuff up from Camp Irwin, okay? Later, we call it Fort Irwin. And its designation changed in 1951 from infantry to armor. That's where the M25 tank transport came from in the trailer, along with some other heavy equipment that were loaded on flat cars and brought 4 miles south of Kingman and offloaded. In the middle of the night, they drove through Kingman. Let me tell you, the sheriff got a lot of complaints. He went out with the undersheriff, by the way, to where the landing site is, and were stopped by military police who had a roadblock. And they argued, and this is a well-known story here. It's passed down by the family as well. They tried for 15 minutes under authority of sheriff and all these things to get past. They wanted to see the commanding officer. They were turned away, period. And so they weren't allowed to see what it is. Arthur Stansel, by the way, was told it was a super secret experimental aircraft. And he didn't know for 2 weeks, in fact, that what he'd been looking at that had no seams was not one of ours. And he didn't actually see living crew members. But he was told by some guy there briefly before an MP shut him up. because they're not supposed to talk to each other, that he had heard that there was what looked like a corpse laying in a nearby tent. And of course, if anybody saw anything, it'd be a fluke. It's dark. And both sides of the craft, the saucer sitting there, are lit up by a pair of all lights, brilliant carbon arc light, which Arthur Stansel said you couldn't see anything away from the craft. You were blinded by the lights. He thought he was on the desert flat, and he wasn't. He was at where the base of the mountain meets the desert, almost flat. But so the crew was taken away. The two that were taken off the mountain that was on fire and was front page news, burned for a week, out of control. 1953 firefighting technology was they took big metal round buckets, they're about 5.5 feet wide, about a foot deep. You fill them up, galvanized big tubs, and you soak gunny sacks in them, and you beat the brush with wet bags, wet gunny sacks, and you use shovels. And the latest science was backpack, copper tank with water, and a little hose and a brass pump to squirt water like a big water gun. And they were waiting for a bulldozer. They didn't have any air tankers, and any of that stuff didn't exist. And it's in the mountain. There's no faucets or fire hydrants or any of that stuff. So, and those two, the two that were at the courthouse in the interrogation room vanished off the face of the earth, and Harry Houdini would still be trying to work out how to do that. 2 living crew members were rescued from the Red Lake crash. 2, it didn't make a soft landing. It hit a butte as it came down, just didn't quite clear the top of the butte. The scar's there, and it's 0.2 miles where it overshot what was called Futang, which is a livestock reservoir that belonged to the owner, Leonard Neal, the rancher, who with 11 other residents there watched this happen. And the craft it ricocheted off the top of the rocky butte. It gutted the lower front of the craft. It rained pieces of UFO as it went down. 2 of the crew suffered severe lower extremity injuries to their legs. They were rushed to Nellis, and they died there. The other 2, who were roughed up but okay, were taken to Groom Lake. That meant you had 4 from the first, 2 from Red Lake, and 2 from, well, that's it. 6, okay. The other 2 that left from the concrete vault, nobody knows where they went. Nobody. They were inside a room, locked inside of a room that's locked twice, with 3 deputies and a Forest Service worker by the door. So people say, well, did they say, these aren't the droids you want? Open the door. We're not here. I have no idea. I can't tell you. Nobody knows.
So I wonder, did they pursue these like an all points bulletin type of thing?
Nope, they did not. And that's an absolute clash with what Sheriff Porter did in 1950, because there's another one. And there were 5. And there was a craft. And they were described by a Army National Guard captain who came because this craft came down, and 1 mile away from where the one would crash in 1953, this craft went down, not far from a sawmill, because the Wallapai Mountain it's like the Rockies. It's covered with timber and forest and elk and all of the things you find in mountain country. And down in a location of what we call the Wallapai Mountain Park today, it's 16 miles out of Kingman, general Kingman area, there were 3 individuals, that were noticed by an Army National Guard captain who was coming down the mountain to get more supplies because they're fighting a fire that people said a disc fell and hit the mountain, and the fire came. A disc, some kind of a disc, they weren't saying it was a flying saucer or anything else. Just something fell, hit the mountain, started a fire. And so they have to deal with the fire. Technology in 1950 and 53 were identical. There was no way, there was no high science in firefighting like we have now. And so the captain slowed down, and he looked, and they all looked like they were burned. Their clothes were burned. One of them looked pretty bad as far as the person being burned. And so he helped these other two men load this man in the back of the small truck, and he headed off for Kingman General Hospital. And as they got down to Kingman, Old Town, population then about 2,800, the man who was nearest the door, the passenger door, said, "Oh, look," and pointed out the windshield, well, his half of the windshield with a steel bar in the middle, and he said, "That looks like our ambulance." Now, you have to understand, there are only two roads in and out of Kingman. The only hospital anywhere is in Kingman. The next place you're going to have to go is Needles, California. That's a long way away. And Las Vegas, even further. You know, if you've got people with serious injury, you know, and they, general admission, they didn't have ERs, but they had an emergency treatment rooms, but they weren't calling it ER like we do now. And so they were going to the right place at the right time. And so the captain said later, it looked like it was an ambulance. So he's pulled up behind it and stopped, and he got up and he walked up to the man sitting behind the wheel on the driver's side. And he said, "Who are you?" And the man said, "Why, I'm the ambulance driver." And the National Guard captain leaned down and looked over to the one in the passenger seat, and he said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm the aide who helps the patient in the ambulance." And so he helped unload the man from the back of the army truck and put him in the back of the ambulance, and the other two men got into the back of what looked like an ambulance, and they pulled away from the front of the hospital. And then within a couple of minutes, Sheriff Porter pulled up, screeched to a stop, and jumped out of his car, and he said, "Did you just pick up three men? Looked like they had been burned or something." And he said, "Yeah, and he said, "Where are they?" And I said, "I just loaded them in an ambulance, and they just left going that way." And Porter, according to the newspaper story, said, you loaded them in an ambulance. They're at the hospital. And he immediately called for an all-points bulletin, and he shut down the roads out of, it's only two roads, you remember that? Only two roads, all-points bulletin in town, the state highway patrol closed off access going out of about 5 miles out of Kingman. No way you're going to get out of here. And very simple. And so as the National Guard captain said, as he went on with the story, talking, he said, "Well, it looked like an ambulance." And then pretty soon he said, "Well, it kind of looked like an ambulance. It might." But what happened is the vehicle and the five vanished. Okay, they were gone. They never found anything at all. And so Sheriff Porter, and I thought this was very strange, as I read the stuff, when he was informed and they stepped into the room and the two strange-looking men were no longer there. I know this is Twilight Zone stuff. This is science fiction stuff. You know, this isn't what a historian runs into. And, I mean, you just don't. And it's like, so the next thing I expected was an all-points bulletin. Close off the courthouse. You know, close off downtown. It's only 6 blocks. You know, there's only two other roads. Nobody comes and goes out of 1950 or 1953 Kingman without being seen on the road. And believe me, you can't just go anywhere any other way because the terrain won't allow that. But he didn't do anything. It's like he turned to the Forest Service worker, Joe, and said something like, "Joe, what are you having for dinner tonight?" They just didn't do anything. And I don't know if the 1950 experience was enough to make him realize that he was dealing with the same kind of people or entity or what. I can't answer that question, but I can tell you in one instance he did everything right and everything you could possibly do to intercept people fleeing. And the next one he did nothing. And of course, there's no way those two could have gotten out of the room. I can testify to that without, and so can the courts, the head of the court security. There's no way out. You know, an ant can't get in there. Nothing can't get in or out. And it's been that way since the day the building was constructed in 1915.
Now, what were some of the purported unusual physical features of the so-called crew members?
They look like us. And when I interviewed the 85-year-old survivor, the Air Force retrieval man.
What was his name, by the way?
Wendell Stevens.
Wendell
you know who
Stevens.
Wendell is? Yeah.
But he claimed he was part of that crew?
Absolutely.
I just have never heard him talk about that before.
That's right. You haven't, have you? Nope. You sure haven't. And even then, he still never broke his word as far as actually breaking the secret. Or he gave me in passing a landmark. As you interview, especially people in advanced years, they get where they'll embellish the story. That's normal, and or they get excited. They kind of relive the moment, and they'll mention something that doesn't strike them of importance, but from a historic standpoint could be very valuable. And that's exactly what went on, either deliberate or incidental, in telling me about a landmark, because I had nothing. I didn't know what the needle looked like for the haystack, okay? And but that's okay, because it's backed up by three others, okay? So this is the thing. Let me tell you something interesting, too. The bus went out the bus with the scientists went out. Everybody knows this, okay? Everybody seems to agree on this because they can't get around some of the basic facts that are removable, that on May 21, 1953, a busload of scientists was dispatched from Phoenix, and it did in fact go to a place southeast of Kingman, Arizona. It did not go to Kingman. It went to a place southeast. This is that place. The clue there was which place is that place? The clue was that helped me find the landmark, and then I knew what I needed to do and where I needed to go. But what the scientists didn't know and the Air Force didn't know is that bus was dispatched late in the afternoon. Is at 10 o'clock that morning, southeast of where the Kingman UFO was sitting on the ground, under the custody of the United States Air Force retrieval team and the various people coming in from Camp Irwin and from Nellis that also came as support people to do all of these things. And the bus is going to be on the road later that same day. There were three men southeast of where the craft was down, 5 flight minutes away from where the Kingman UFO was at. And they were out there looking at an area for, innocently enough, for a fishing derby for children. And they were stocking a pool of water with some fish for the kids to fish and this type of thing. And one of the men was a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot who, I have his name and all of that. And I have the name of all these people and their life and where they're buried and when they died, all of these things. And this man was under contract with U.S. Air Force to train fighter pilots at 3 air bases in Arizona. At that very moment, he was the man in charge training fighter pilots at 3 air bases in Arizona in 1953. The other man with him was a pilot and a businessman, and the third man was the sports editor for the Prescott Evening newspaper. And the pilot who was with them, the one who was training pilots, looked up, and right between them and the Kingman UFO were 8 UFOs, saucers, one sitting on the left hovering and one on the right hovering, and 6 in the middle proceeded to do aggressive dogfight maneuvers. They watched for over an hour. Okay? They were within visual sight of where one of their craft was sitting on the ground from the altitude they're at. And that's front page news in the Prescott paper. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is a person said that not a single thing was in any newspaper, that they researched everything within 100 miles of Kingman, including in Las Vegas, and there's not a single word about any UFOs within 100 miles or within Las Vegas. Las Vegas isn't paying attention to Kingman now. They didn't pay attention then. But there's nothing about UFOs in the paper, and therefore it can't be true, and summed up by saying, and remember, if the UFO crash isn't in the newspaper, then it didn't happen. And I agree to a point, and then I disagree the rest of the way, because as it turns out in May of 1953, of all these newspapers, this person says they went through the morgues and looked at every page and everything to determine what they're saying was accurate, is that, first off, there were only 2 newspapers besides Kingman's in 1953. And that doesn't mean you have to put on your hiking boots to go in and look at bound newspapers at hundreds of newspaper offices, because there was only 2. And of course, I just told you a story that blows that story completely to pieces.
So that was in Prescott, you said, right?
Prescott, yeah,
Prescott.
Front page of Prescott.
Right, which is, in not real far away from Kingman.
It says flying saucers, listen to this, flying saucers return.
Yeah.
That means they're there again.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because that's not the first time. And I'm not going to get off into all the other times they were at Prescott. But I'll tell you this. When they were being, it's like Kenneth Arnold is given credit for being the first man in modern era to report UFOs. And he said he saw the 9 UFOs at 3 o'clock, 2:59 p.m., 3 p.m. On the 24th of June, 1947. Okay, that was a Tuesday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The guy lives in Boise, Idaho. And interestingly enough, it was on the radio that people saw 9 UFOs in Seattle on the morning of the 24th, in enough time that AP Wire was able to get it to major newspapers. And it was in the Boise newspaper before Kenneth Arnold ever took off to fly west towards Mount Rainier or anywhere else. And he reported it on the 25th, not the 24th. And that doesn't take into account that it was not just reported there, but it was also reported by a meteorologist in Kentucky seeing UFOs on the 24th. And in and around that period, I've got a string of other people. And then I also have the declared first sighting in modern time of UFOs. It predates all of this. And I'm not talking the old dirigible stuff back in the 1800s, and that kind of stuff. I'm talking right in around the same period. And Civil Air Patrol sent out multiple ones seen landing and crashing and flying, and sheriff's departments and the military involved, and the military who supposedly denied out of hand at Roswell there was no such thing. I have a copy of a formal official document released by the Air Force after Roswell saying the main problem the Air Force has with the UFOs right now is that the Air Force lacks the resources to try to cover and investigate them all, and that they acknowledge that they exist. After claiming no such thing happened at Roswell. So that's another story, and it's like I have to detach myself from this because I have other books I'm writing, and so I have to get this out and give people clues and information. They can go get the stuff or look for it themselves and become historians in their own right.
Someone in the forum has an opinion question for you, and it goes: reported UFO crashes seem to occur in remote locations. Do you think it is possible that this is no coincidence and that the military target UFO craft in remote locations with an aim to bring them down covertly?
Can you say that last part again?
Yeah.
Do I think what?
Do you think that the military target UFO craft in remote locations with the aim to bring them down covertly?
Let me answer that this way, because I want to give some people some things to hang on to here. First off, the Kingman UFO, the first one, came down in the daytime, not at night. This isn't the Judy Walcott story that has been shared by another UFO person that claims all kinds of ridiculous stuff about an Air Force man watching the crash at night 8 years after the whole base was gone, and it's like couldn't been an airman there. The air base was closed. The tower was shut down. And all of these other things. And her husband died in Vietnam, and he had the papers to prove it. And blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's all baloney. And basically, what we're talking about here is the craft came down, something interfered with its propulsion or its navigation system, or it made the crew dizzy. I haven't any idea. Like flying through 3 triangulated, overpowered radar systems that were firing off short pulse, modulating frequency radar use systems. They didn't have any frequency locks. So even the Air Force didn't know what they were doing with this stuff. And they likely killed every one of the operators and technicians. And I've tried to determine that those people died from brain tumors because of the radiation fallout here, or if it's from running the overpowered radar, because the back and side lobe leakage was horrendous. So they were basically committing suicide. Wow. But anyway, the craft went down. It was pristine. The crew would pass you on the sidewalk. All you would notice, they were lightly built. They're 4.5 to 5 feet tall. They have close crop, sandy colored hair. Their faces are a little wider, like they're from maybe Siberia or someplace like that, but or Asian, where some people have a wider across from the jawbone, or the cheekbones. I'm sorry, the cheekbones, but perfectly normal. And that's the witness. When he told me this and he saw them, he said, and I said, "Well, what they look like?" And he said, "They were human," and he was still shocked because they look like us. And so I'm finding out later, there's all kinds of early reports where the occupants of the craft are humanoid. They're not reptilian, they're not giants or anything else. And these crafts, you'd have to figure out how you'd have room for something 8 foot tall. But it was taken out of here under cover of darkness. It didn't go down any highways. It went right, I'm not going to say. It went across the desert, okay? It's better than the highways. There's no curves. You just cross the desert and watch out for washers. That's it. And they popped out on 93, just a few miles south of Hoover Dam. Army Corps of Engineers was there with a barge. The M25 drove right on it, with the craft. That was the end of the retrieval team's work in connection with that craft. It was handed off. They came back just in time to start recovery on the Red Lake crash, okay? Because it happened as they were coming back. And the craft that went up there is the UFO. The entire Area 51 story is based on for UFOs. That's it. It wasn't torn to shreds. If there was any back engineering, which is claimed, and I have some of that interview stuff, then it would come from that one, not from a junk heap.
Right. Well, now there was talk about some possible physical evidence. Did you ever look into that part of it?
Yes, I have some.
Okay.
I also have part of a P-39 sitting here in my office. Nobody could find anything. Over 1,000 people went out, arm to arm. That was in 1997. It was front page newspaper to go out and find where a Air Cobra P-39 was doing a mock ME-109 attack on a B-17 bomber crew, teaching side gunners how to handle the German Messerschmitts. And the pilot had been flying a P-38, which is a twin-engine, twin-boom, twin-tail, highly maneuverable aircraft, and he pulled back on the stick because he made a machine gun run, mock machine gun run, on the bomber. And when he pulled back, the plane didn't pull back, and it cut part of the wing off the bomber. And the bomber rolled over on its back, and it flew 1 mile, and then argued into the ground and killed 15 crew members. And the P-39 went straight in and hit a hill that's kind of rests to like a L-shaped hill. One side of it's pure quartz, and the other side is lodestone, fool's gold, magnetic. Okay, and 1,000 people, over 1,000 people were taken out in 1997, 1 arm length apart, and they swept the whole area looking for any parts the Air Force, Army Air Corps may have missed. They found nothing. I have a cockpit brace from the pilot's cockpit from that aircraft because I'm used to doing this stuff, and I see things that aren't right. But they did find, in 1997, they did find dog tags from where the bomber went down. But I didn't go over there because this was 1 mile away from where the Red Lake craft went down. And that's why, and the curator, aviation curator, who had looked for 20 years for the Red Lake crash, mentioned this crash. I said, well, take me there because I can read ground terrain. If I can see anything, I'll be able to find something if there's anything. And I did. And it's here. So, and I have stuff I have items from the landing site. And right where the craft sat, background radiation is about 5 times above normal. Very carefully, I'm saying it's about 5 times normal background radiation. The director of MUFON for the state of Pennsylvania said I said it was high, very high radiation. No, I'm telling you, it's about 5 times the normal background, which can run anywhere from 12 to 16 microsieverts. It's like, that's what, when you go outside in a normal day with nobody setting any bombs off in the atmosphere, that's the background radiation we have now. It's usually 14 to 16. Used to be 12. We've polluted. Korea does stuff North Korea that leaks and that kind of thing. This all has an impact because the planet rotates, and things are taken up, and they come back down in the form of rain or dust and whatever. And 60 feet away, it's normal. But you can see it, and I can see, anybody can see it, and the Cameron's engineer could see. This is where the bus parked. Yeah, it parked exactly 50 feet from the craft, and that's where this cutaway is. It's for the bus, and the scientists on board the bus sat in the bus, and military police come up the door, and there's a guy, a military policeman with a roster, and he calls a name. That scientist gets out of the bus. He walks down the aisle and gets out, and he's escorted by an MP to exactly the place of his expertise to examine on the craft. Make a report. You got 20 minutes. Make a report, and that whole busload was reloaded and on the way back to Phoenix within 1 hour. Okay? They did not then take busloads of scientists several hundred miles away from a place out in the boondocks to look at something that's pristine that they would have put in a hangar if it's a super secret airplane. You know, this thing wasn't busted up. So, but nobody inspected the one that hit the butte. The Air Force was there. They swept the area twice to get all the debris. Bottom rock and the stuff the Air Force left right there is still there. There's bottom rock in the middle of a flat desert where they dug down to get the rest of the pieces of the craft that had been augured into the ground. You see the skid mark. Erosion hasn't done any big damage there. We don't get a lot of rain here. That's why they call it a desert. Okay? And so here's all this bottom rock. And so there's parts there. And there are some people with some things that they're not going to share them with anybody, including me. And I don't blame them. They've had it in the family a long time. But if you go to talk to them, they don't know anything. If you're an outsider, they don't know anything. And they really don't like that kind of attention. And that's a fact.
Now, when you said that you had evidence yourself, did you mean of the supposed craft or the other site you were talking about?
Well, I have some evidence from both places.
Okay, well, can you describe what the evidence is of where the crash happened?
Not now, not before I release anything. Nope.
Okay. Well, well, thank you. We're out of time here. I appreciate it. And that's it for the show. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you have a very productive and prosperous and healthy New Year. And I thank you for your time. And I hope people will take an interest in this when I release it, which will probably be mid or later in the year, as far as the pocketbook.
Okay. And your website is your name, right? No, it's not. It's Kingman Crash, right?
Yes, www.kingmanufocrashes.com. And the name of the new book and what follows is 7 Days in May, The Kingman UFO Story.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. All right, everyone. So we're just ending that a little bit early. Thank you, live listeners, for hanging in there. And next week, the guest is has not confirmed, so I'm not going to announce it. But anyway, it should be posted on our website, podcastufo.com, on Sunday. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. This is Martin Willis, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.